Good afternoon. I'm Bill Keller. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Marshall Project. Thank you. Let me introduce Norman Seabrook. Norman grew up in the South Bronx, became a corrections officer in 1985, and has been president of the New York City Corrections Officers Benevolent Association for almost 20 years. He gets reelected over and over again because he's credited with helping improve the compensation, raise the prestige, and increase the political clout of COBA's nearly, 10,000 members, right? And it's hard to imagine anything is going to change in this city's jails without Norman Seabrook playing a major role. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Norman, I'll tell you up front that you couldn't pay me enough to be a CO on Rikers. Your members work obscenely long hours under horrible conditions. They face real danger almost every day. On the other hand, nobody forces them to take those jobs. The pay and the pensions, thanks in large part to you, are pretty good. Your members are figures of authority who want and expect to be trusted and respected on a par with police and firefighters. So when a few COs go off and beat the crap out of a prisoner or let a mentally ill patient die in his cell, both instances we've read about this year, are we wrong to feel betrayed? Isn't that a genuine scandal?
Listen, thank you for having me, and I don't think that correction officers get paid enough money anyway, but that's what I'm here for. As far as correction officers doing things that they shouldn't be doing, I have a fiduciary responsibility under the law to represent them, but I certainly don't feel that what they did is right. I think it's wrong. I think that abusing anyone is wrong. I think that the way that the system is designed to fail. And until we recognize that and do something about it, it's going to continue to happen. We're understaffed. In the last 20 years, we must have had 11, maybe I'd say 9 different correction commissioners, maybe 8 different chiefs of department, maybe 20 different assistant chiefs, deputy chiefs. So when there's no consistency in doing things the way that they're supposed to be done, things are going to happen. We always have the headline of a correction officer doing something that he or she shouldn't have done. Unfortunately, that's the case in any organization that you have. But 99% of correction officers do what they're supposed to do every day. We live in the 5 boroughs of the city of New York. I still live in the Bronx. A lot of us are and our children are victims of the same brutality that you've been talking about here today. A lot of our members are victims of the same crimes that are happening on the streets of New York City. I had a correction officer watching a basketball game with her son. She was shot just sitting there watching a game with her son. So violence continues to be a serious problem in the city of New York and in the jail system, but something has to be done about it.
But I watched your YouTube response to some recent reporting by my former employer, the New York Times, and read some of your reactions, including an op-ed that you wrote. And forgive me for saying so, but it sounded a little as if you were making excuses for some egregiously bad behavior that damages your people.
I don't make excuses for someone's actions as an adult in things that they do. And part of the problem is that the New York Times and others don't get it right. They get what sells papers. They don't really want to talk about the real issues. The real issues are Rikers Island is the new dumping ground for the city of New York. We have the mentally ill, we have the homeless, we have the innocent, we have the guilty, and people just seem to say, let's get them out of my community. Then you have the city council that sits there and say, well, take the kids off of Rikers Island. Well, I don't see too many people raising their hands saying, let's build a jail in my community. So, it's almost like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. I'm going to always support and defend my members when they're right. The ones that are wrong, they have the lawyers and they'll take care of it because everybody's entitled to due process and everybody's entitled to their innocence. There's some disturbing things that happened over the years in the Department of Correction. some disturbing things that have happened in the police department, in the fire department, in the teachers. It's just life, and those things are going to continue to happen. But I think that what's more important here is that when you have a 16-year-old sitting in a cell, and they're in the day room, and there's about 8 of them in there, and I go in there and I talk to these kids, and I ask them, you know, what are you doing? And they say, well, Norman, you know, and I tell them to call me Norman. I have no problems with that. And I say, well, what do you do all day long? And they say, we don't do nothing all day long. When we finish with school, we come back here, we sit here, and we watch reruns of different movies that are on television. So I asked the warden to come up one day, and I said, you got to give these kids something to do. And, you know, they look at me like I got 6 heads. I said, I don't care if you give them a paintbrush and let them paint their cells, or take them out and take them into the cafeteria and teach them how to be short order cooks. Give them something to do. Because if they have something to do, that means that they're not in the correction officer's ear nagging them all day long, asking them for things that they can't get. But no one wants to do that. Mm-hmm. No one wants to take the time to say, let me help this kid. Let's just build a system so that the kid leaves here and comes back next week.
Mm-hmm. I want to get to some of those specific points, but I just to stick with this for one more round of questions, I guess. In August, the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan released a report, I'm sure you're familiar with it, saying that the Department of Correction had systematically violated the civil rights of male teenagers held at Rikers by failing to protect them from the rampant use of unnecessary and excessive force by corrections officers. The report cited a deep-seated culture of violence and a powerful code of silence among Rikers staff, along with a virtually useless system for investigating attacks by guards. So is there a kind of blue wall, a code of silence, and isn't it in the interest of COBA to help weed out the misfits?
Well, let me say that I don't think that there is a code of silence. And let me preface that by saying this. Even when I go to the Correction Academy to speak to correction officers when they first become correction officers, I tell them, do not use unnecessary force. Use whatever force is necessary to terminate the threat against you and or an inmate and or someone else, a civilian. And I stick to that because I also go by and tell them, look, if you see a correction officer doing something that he or she should not be doing, you need to stop them. Because what's going to happen is you're going to end up being indicted by the Bronx grand jury. You, that had nothing to do with it, is going to end up being indicted for falsifying documents and not submitting a report. And everyone else is going to lose, your family is going to lose their livelihood because you're going to get sent off to prison. Mm-hmm. Now, as the president of the Correction Officers Union, you've seen my YouTube videos. You've seen me tell them that they have to be searched. You've seen me telling them that they have to do what they have to do. You've seen me telling them that they have to respect inmates, non-uniform members, anybody that comes into the department. You've seen me do this. So at the end of the day, all I can do is tell a person, look, this is what your responsibilities are. If you choose not to listen to what I'm telling you, then that's on you. You're a grown man or a grown woman. My mom often told me, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to tell people what they're supposed to do. And I'm going to stand there and I'm going to defend the rights of correction officers, inmates, non-uniform members. It doesn't matter to me because they're human beings. But I'm certainly not going to advocate for anyone to beat inmates, beat adult inmates, put them in a cell, don't give them the help that they need. And if you want to really talk about it, let's talk about the fact that the mental health in the Department of Correction is responsible to give inmates their medication. It's time for that doctor to get up off of their derriere and go do their job as well. But nothing happens to those people. It's always New York City correction officers, New York City correction officers. At the end of the day, we're not responsible for administering medication. The doctor is. So the individual, and may his soul rest in peace, that died because he didn't get his medication in a timely fashion, they didn't write, the doctor did it. They wrote the correction officer didn't do what they were supposed to do. Our job is to pick up the phone, notify the supervisor, notify the proper physicians that there is an inmate that needs help. If they don't come and you completely put it in the logbook, do it again, somebody has to be accountable. I'm all for accountability. But it's never the supervisor. It's never the commissioner. It's never any of those other people. It's always the correction officer. Okay. And we have to get past that.
Back in April, when Joe Pont was appointed the New York City Correction Commissioner after a career as a reformer in Maine's prison system, you had some unkind things to say about him, including, "We don't need a reformer, we need law and order." Lately, you've been more conciliatory. I've seen you quoted as saying, "I've learned to respect the man, and he's a CO at heart." So what changed? Did he convince you that the system does need reform, or did he back away?
No, he didn't convince me that the system needs reform. What he convinced me of is that he is receptive to ideas and suggestions that is going to make the agency that much better. I think that
like what?
Like what? For example, like getting rid of some of the top managers in a Department of Correction that don't do what they're supposed to do. There needs to be accountability. And I say that over and over again. If the commissioner of the Department of Correction tells the chief or assistant chief or deputy chief what has to happen, then it's incumbent upon that person as a supervisor to ensure that it's happening. But if they're not ensuring that it's happening and it finally trickles down to the correction officer, you're going to have some officers that say, "I'm not doing anything. Nobody else is doing anything about it." And that's not the attitude that I want them to have. So what Joe did was Joe said, "Look, Norman, I'm willing to listen to what you have to say. I'm not management. I'm a union leader, and I fight for the rights of everybody. It doesn't matter who they are. And I fight for the rights of that inmate that wants something to eat or wants a blanket or wants to go to medication. But it's the system that is designed for these young men and young women to continue to come back to jail over and over and over again. They want to spend $400,000 to do a study to tell me or tell the city of New York why people commit suicide. Well, why don't you take the $400,000, give some of these kids a job, and you don't have to worry about whether or not they committed suicide or not. They'd have some employment. They'd have some dignity about themselves. But we won't do that because prison systems, jail systems is big money to a lot of people.
Wait, you think inmates commit suicide because they're bored?
A lot of them do, yeah. A lot of them do. They have psychological problems. They're not getting the help and medication that they need. They're in a cell. They're by themselves, and nobody's communicating with them. Their family's not coming to visit them. That could be very depressing. It's almost like you being at home in a very snowy winter day, and all week long it snowed. All week long you can't get out your house. You're going to get cabin fever. So can you imagine what a 17-year-old is going through that's incarcerated for a crime he didn't commit or for 2 nickel bags in his pocket? That's sitting there being intimidated by gang members and all of these other individuals that want them to join this gang or that gang. So at the end of the day, yeah, I think some of them do commit suicide because they're bored.
You bring up an interesting point, because one of Joe Pont's big issues in Maine, in Maine's prison system, was punitive segregation, or what the civilians know as solitary confinement. You have said, quote, "Punitive segregation is an effective tool that works." Works for whom?
It works for the inmates, it works for the staff, it works for the inmate, him or herself. What do I mean by that? If an inmate takes a homemade shiv that you would take a piece of metal, sharpen it down, and stabs another inmate 52 times, what do you do with this person? You put him back in general population so he could stab again? No, you can't do that. What does this inmate do that breaks the jaw of a correction officer in 3 places? Put him back in the housing area so he can assault another officer? So punitive segregation in some cases is necessary. Do I think that a 16 or a 17-year-old that gets caught smoking a cigarette should be put in punitive segregation? Absolutely not. Do I think that a 16 or 17-year-old that tries to murder another inmate be put in punitive segregation? Absolutely, because this inmate is a danger not only to himself, not only to the staff, but to other inmates. Out of all the inmates that come to jail, it's only, maybe 1,000 of them out of 12,000 and change that are just completely out of control. And they're out of control because there is no law and order. There is no get rearrested if you commit a crime against another inmate. The system is failing the people involved in the system. You can't take an inmate. You could go up to the Bronx District Attorney's office and say, "This inmate just stabbed another inmate." Well, the caseload. You heard the judge earlier. He's got 50 cases on his desk. He really doesn't want to hear about a gang assault that took place in the jail. Why don't they raise the level of gang assaults to be conspiracy and let the feds take it over, as opposed to always saying, well, we got to do something else. What else is there to do? So, you know, I know you're asking me the questions, and I appreciate that, but what do you do with the kid that slashes another inmate, somebody's child, and give them 100 stitches across their face? Where do you put this person? What do you say? Okay, so you move from this housing area to that housing area? Not all inmates are bad. Bill, I must tell you, we don't have problems with a lot of inmates in jail, but there are a core group of inmates that are involved in gang activity that will continue to try to beat the system, continue to assault other inmates, continue to rape other inmates, continue to assault correction officers, and something must be done. Now, if you're willing to recharge them, give them a new charge, and have it run up front as far as their sentence is concerned, that makes sense, because then there's a deterrent. But there are no deterrents in the city's jail system. It's a dumping ground.
Pont's argument about solitary, though, was that he made it in Maine, and he's made it since he came down here, is that it can actually make the situation worse. That solitary can produce everything from depression to psychosis. It literally makes you crazy. Prisoners in solitary are 5 times as likely to kill themselves, to get back to the issue of suicide again.
Well, I'm not a doctor, so I can't speak to that medical language, but what I can say to you is that an inmate in solitary confinement that has, or punitive segregation, that has committed a violent act against another inmate, my question becomes again, so what do I do with this person? Do I allow them to continue to roam the corridors like Hannibal Lecter and just decide to destroy people's lives? There's somebody watching this right now that has a child in jail, okay, that has been assaulted by another inmate in jail. And what do I say to that parent? What do I say to that correction officer? I have a brother doing 25 years to life in prison. At the end of the day, he's in there because he did something he wasn't supposed to do. He got caught up in the 3 strikes, you're out. I love my brother, but at the end of the day, he committed a crime. He's got to do the time. At the end of the day, when you look at the bigger picture, we have to give these young people something to do other than incarceration. We have to give these young people education. What happened to the PAL? What happened to the Boys Club? What happened to the after-school programs? We took all of that out. We've dumped it into every other area you want to dump the money into, and then we want to blame the Department of Correction for the problems that occur. We've had 9 commissioners, dozens and dozens of chiefs, dozens and dozens of wardens. At the end of the day, there's no consistency. So let's say it's the correction officer's fault. No, it's not the correction officer's fault. It's the leader of that top right there, of the commissioner, chief of department. Those are the leaders. You don't have those problems when you talk about the fire, the police, the sanitation, the teachers. You don't have those problems. But you have those problems when you talk about correction, because it's sexy to talk about that. Because you want to talk about the young Black and Latino kids that are incarcerated in the city's jail system, and you want to put individuals on a pedestal and say, look what's happening to the brown and Black community. But at the end of the day, you got to do something more than just keep saying, look what's happening to them. Give them a job.
Last week we read about an investigator. We read about an investigator who dressed up as a corrections officer and made his way into one of Rikers jails, loaded with heroin, pot, alcohol, razor blades, presumably not to be used as shaving implements. And he was dressed as a corrections officer and made his way through. How seriously should we take the problem of corruption and contraband and the role of COs in that? And what do you do about it?
I think that you take it very seriously, and I take it very seriously. When Joe Pont first decided that he wanted to implement a new search procedure on the front gate to try to eliminate prison contraband, and you looked at my YouTubes, you saw me put out a YouTube saying to the officers, I expect you to go through the procedure, I expect you to be searched, I'm searched, I expect everybody to do what they're supposed to do. I had 2 of my members. One called me a house nigger, the other one called me an Uncle Tom, that I would allow the department to do that. Well, At the end of the day, my answer to them is, I want you to be safe. I want the inmates to be safe. I want you to go home the same way you came to work. Because I know through my experience that there are individuals that do not abide by the law because they're intimidated by the communities in which they live. And I tell my officers, and you can read it anywhere on my website, that I've told them, I don't want you to take on the identity of those you are paid to supervise. So when he put those procedures in place, I think that they're a good thing. I think that it helps. And also, just going one step further, I think that the DOI investigated that allegedly, because I don't know this to be true, allegedly smuggled or got contraband into the system. I don't know whether or not this was something that was real or something that's not. So until I see all the facts, it's not real to me. Show it to me. If you got video cameras up on the front, show me that you were able to take 2,200 bags of heroin into a jail. 2,200 bags. That's a lot of heroin to take into a jail, okay? That's number one. Number two, which I think is more important than anything else, what do we do to protect the rights of correction officers so that we're not targeted with the fact that we're doing something wrong? I had a conversation with the commissioner on the way here. I said, you need to go a little bit further. Going forward, why not take the security dep that's supposed to be in charge of the facility, put him on the front gate or her, and make sure you check off everybody that's supposed to be here today. Because if people could just roam in and out of a jail any way that they want to, then there's something wrong with the security system of the jail. So we have to correct that. But in order to do those things, people have got to stop playing dominoes and moving commissioners all over the place. The mayor of the city of New York needs to pay just as much attention to the correction department as he pays to the police department and the fire department, because those kids are our future. And every time you turn around, every single time you turn around, you pick up the paper today, you pick it up tomorrow, it doesn't matter when you pick it up. Somebody on page 3, 4, or 5 killed someone, who shot someone, who ran over someone, is going to Rikers Island. And when he gets to Rikers Island, he's either going to graduate by cutting another inmate to join a specific gang, or he's going to become a victim because there's not enough officers to protect them all. There's not enough officers to make sure. And the officers that should be doing what they're supposed to be doing, they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And the ones that are not, I have no use for them in my union, and the membership has no use for them either.
All right. Our little red clock has ticked down to 0.
We 0 already?
Yeah, we're 0 already. Anyway,
yeah.
Thanks so much for coming today.
No,
I think
you so
people
much,
needed to hear this.
Thank you.
This is the video.